Let's go for it!
Hey everybody, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host of the Dark Stuff channel here on YouTube. Thanks a lot for tuning in, checking out the new video. Now, one thing, if you're a regular subscriber of the channel, you're probably pretty surprised at the subject of this video. If you're somebody new to the channel, welcome. Thanks a lot for checking it out. I am talking about Iron Maiden on today's video because I couldn't do a series on best debut albums without talking about the first Iron Maiden album, their self-titled album from 1980, because it is an exceptional album. It's my favorite Iron Maiden album of all time, and it also is just a killer debut. Let me tell you what this video is not. First of all, this video is not going to be a debate about who's the better singer in Iron Maiden, whether it's Paul Di'Anno or Bruce Dickinson. I'm just focusing on the band's first album, how important it is, how special it is to me, and why, whether you're an Iron Maiden fan that goes way back, you should still like this album. You probably do, duh. But whether you're somebody that maybe doesn't think you're an Iron Maiden fan, might actually get some real enjoyment out of this self-titled debut. So even though I'm not known for doing a whole lot of metal stuff on this channel, I was a teenage metalhead. I grew up listening to heavy metal all throughout the 80s, and my sort of Iron Maiden origin story is probably that about 83 or so, when Peace of Mind came out. I was 12. I remember going to the department store. It was Richmond Gordman at the time, and I bought the cassette. I brought it home, and I was all about Flight of Icarus at the time. I think I'd seen the video on MTV. Maybe I knew Run to the Hills or something. I'm not sure. But for some reason, Maiden never became one of like my bands when I was into metal in the 1980s. I always thought Maiden was good, but it just, some of the prog stuff was boring to me. I've never liked prog music ever since I was a kid. I still don't to this day. Maybe that was what it was. Maybe some of the goofy lyrics, the sort of Dungeons and Dragons-y, ultra fantasy stuff that I always thought was sort of silly about metal, I thought was especially silly in Iron Maiden. But I will say now I'm 50 years old, and I'm a bigger Maiden fan today now than I ever was back in their peak in the 1980s. And it's too bad, because when I listen to the 80s stuff now, and I love it, I don't know what I didn't hear in it when I was more prone to like that stuff. But it's neither here nor there. It is what it is. I wasn't a big Maiden fan during that era, but I'm much more of a fan at this point. A little background on the record. So it was released April 14th, 1980, produced by an unknown guy. I couldn't find much information on him, named Will Malone. It's the lone album in Iron Maiden's catalog to feature a guy named Dennis Stratton on lead guitar. He joined, I think, at the tail end of '79 as a replacement. And he did the record, and then he did the subsequent touring for the record, for most of it anyways, and then was sacked at the end of that tour. So this is the only album that he's ever appeared on with Maiden, and it's only one of two studio albums where the original lead vocalist, Paul Di'Anno, was the singer. There's a great series of documentary videos that Iron Maiden put together themselves, and it's on their YouTube channel. You want to check this out. That does the origins of Iron Maiden. Okay, it is all the way up through about 88 through Maiden in Europe, or no, is that Maiden Japan or whatever? Anyways, up through about 1988. Starts in the mid-70s when Steve Harris first started Iron Maiden, and it shows every single lineup iteration, all the hiring, all the firing, all the this singer, the that singer, the drummer, the this, the that. There's so many different people that I couldn't do it justice. I'm just going to tell you to just watch those documentaries, okay? So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be saying that Iron Maiden's original lineup is Steve Harris on bass, Dennis Stratton on guitar, Dave Murray on guitar, Paul Di'Anno on vocals, and Clive Burr on drums. Now, no disrespect to the dudes that played in the band before then, but you weren't on an album, and the first lineup, the original lineup, is considered when you did your first album. This album is a culmination of songs that the band had been playing in the clubs for years. Okay, these songs go back to 1975, in some cases 76, and throughout all the various lineups of Iron Maiden that they had before making the record, a lot of the signature songs were there, you know, Running Free and Phantom of the Opera and Iron Maiden and Sanctuary. You know, all of those tunes were there in their early live sets, and this was what the fans really grabbed onto when the record finally came out. When the record did come out, they did some touring throughout Europe, opening for Kiss on the Unmasked tour. Totally jealous over here because the Unmasked tour didn't play in the United States. It only played in Europe and Australia. And not only would you get Iron Maiden as the opener, but you got the tour that featured Eric Carr on drums and Ace Frehley, which was a stellar combination of that band, despite Unmasked being a shit record. But whatever, I'm digressing. Sorry, folks. My personal favorite Iron Maiden song of all time, Running Free, was released as a single right about the time of the release, or just a little bit before. Also, just to be clear, I'm going to be talking about the American version of the Iron Maiden album. It is a little different in the UK. The song Sanctuary has always been on my copy of Iron Maiden, and I know that's not the case in the UK. It was released as a single, and it's a very well-known Iron Maiden song. It's an old school one. They've done it live, you know, on some of the live albums and stuff like that. But it technically wasn't included, but it always has been on my version. It was always on side 2, about the middle of side 2. There's a remastered version where it puts it at track 2 on side 1 right after Prowler. But I'm just going to do it the way I remember it, which is Sanctuary was on side 2. What I love about this self-titled album is really what kind of Steve Harris from Iron Maiden hates about this album, because I do think this is a punk metal record. Okay? Harris hates any comparison to punk rock because he associates that with poor musicianship or something like that, or people who are shooting up heroin every waking minute or something like that. I mean, I don't know what exactly he thinks, but he definitely has a very negative connotation. For me, I think the difference between punk and metal is usually content. Okay? Heavy metal is usually more about fantasy, and punk is more about reality. You know, that's the way I've always seen the distinction. They both are like, you know, heaviness and aggression and stuff like that. So on this album, lyrically, the lyrics are more punk rock. They're less sort of fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons-y and stuff like that, and they're more gritty, the gritty side of life, you know, crime and prostitution and you know, just having a tough time, hiding from the cops, you know, being on the, you know, I need sanctuary from the law, you know, that kind of stuff. You're not going to be hearing Seventh Son of a Seventh Son or the Clairvoyant or these kind of deep sort of nerdy concepts. Again, I love that stuff, and I'm not knocking it. This isn't a debate about any era of Iron Maiden, but if I'm just being honest, I like this stuff. So there are elements, signature elements of the Iron Maiden sound on this record, even though it's not fully realized, but you do hear the beginning. The twin guitar stuff is there. The you know, that they do that on a million songs. There's that sort of Iron Maiden noodling. That's what I call it. Okay, again, not in a disrespectful way, but it's just like I consider that sort of noodling. So you get a lot of that twin guitar stuff. It's not nearly as pronounced on this record as it is Killers onward, because Adrian Smith joins the band after that. He's a step up from Dennis Stratton as a guitar player, and he melds in the band a lot more. Okay. Also, a difference in this album between other albums is the bass is not as loud and prominent as it is on most Iron Maiden records. Iron Maiden has that sort of galloping rhythm going with the bass, you know, they're really fast. And there's not as much of that, and the bass is a lot lower in the mix, which I think obviously Steve Harris nixed that shit after the first record. He's like, we're going to bump the bass up on the next album, and it's been that way pretty much ever since 1980. Just run through the record real quick and tell you kind of my brief thoughts on all of the tracks. I do like every song on the record for different reasons, you know. Opens with Prowler. That's a killer opener, great riff. That's the thing. There are so many catchy riffs on this record. I love that harmony part, which is rare on Iron Maiden, where you have these backup vocals with that, I just got to find my way, you know, and they all do it. It really, really great. Amazing song. Again, perfect. Very, very signature early Maiden on that track. I shall return. All right, next up is a track called Remember Tomorrow. It's kind of slower. It's got a really nice sort of slow intro. It gets a little bit faster when it gets heavy, but it's mostly just kind of remains mid-tempo. And this is one where, you know, critics of Paul Di'Anno, I think, are very wrong when they say that he was just a limited punk rock singer or whatever, and that he could not have continued on with Maiden on all the stuff they did after Killers. Because I think he sings in a more traditional heavy metal style on this particular one. He even lets out a metal scream, which is pretty fucking good, especially for it's coming out of nowhere, because there weren't bands doing that much. I mean, Priest a little bit. This is a great display of Paul Di'Anno as a vocalist. Great display of the band being able to play mid-tempo, speeding up a bit for the instrumental parts and the guitar solos, then coming back down to mid-tempo. So again, it shows, I don't know if it's time changes, I'm not a technical person, but there are definitely tempo changes that go on through this song, and it's about a 5.5 minute song. So this is the beginning of them getting a little bit longer in the length of tunes. It's followed by Running Free, which is the absolute best Iron Maiden song of all time. It is slamming. It's the ultimate teen anthem. You're running free from your parents, from your school, from life, from whatever. It is short and fast and to the point. It also contains what I think is the origin of the actual Maiden signature guitar noodle. You know, okay? It's there, and it's like to the T. That's where they got it. That's where it started on that song. So not only does that song have all the energy and the punk energy and all that, but then you have that sort of signature Maiden noodle that you're getting in there that gives you the hint, this is Iron Maiden. Like if you hadn't heard it before, you would recognize it. Okay, next up would be the song Phantom of the Opera, and this is the longest song on the album. Steve Harris says that it is the first Maiden prog song that they ever came up with. It's very fast, it's great, sounds a lot more like later Maiden, like what they were doing 2-3 records later. There's a slow part in the middle, which is kind of weird, and it kind of sounds like Queen a little bit, and maybe mixed in with new wave. So again, that's probably an attack, according to Steve Harris, by saying that there's a new wave element to it, but that's kind of what it sounded like in that middle part, right? So obviously this is a hint of where Maiden was going to go with the longer song. Next up is Transylvania. It's an instrumental song. It's a super fast, catchy, very hummable for an instrumental. Not much I can say about it. The playing is really good. Again, if you don't like the sort of rawness of the production on this album, then you're going to use it as a criticism more on this track than even on any other track. But you kind of got to get over it. It is what it is. If Iron Maiden really wanted to fix it or whatever, they probably would have by now. It's been 41 years since the record came out, you know? Next up would be Strange World, and Strange World starts off kind of like Remember Tomorrow. It's got this like slow intro, and then it kind of quickly goes into the guitar solos, and there's trading solos between Stratton and Dave Murray, and there's no vocals till it's almost 2 minutes into the song. It has a more I would say more mainstream or AOR type vocal track on this one. Again, showing that Paul Di'Anno did have range beyond what he sounded like in the song Iron Maiden or in the song Prowler or something like that. He does have a serious range, and he can sing in a lot broader sort of style than he's been written off as, you know. But again, I don't want to get into a debate about Paul Di'Anno versus Bruce Dickinson, because I'm not prepared to necessarily have that debate. I don't care. Okay, Okay, now I'm going to include the song Sanctuary at this point, because on my old Iron Maiden album, the way I grew up with it, this is about where it came in. I would say Sanctuary, no doubt, is the most punk rock song on the entire album, okay? It's got really classic lyrics about being on the run from the law, hiding from the police. This could have been a Black Flag song in 1980. I could see Black Flag playing something like this, having Rollins or Dez or whoever was the singer back then in 1980 do it. If you listen to how they played it live after Di'Anno left and Dickinson came in, you look at that Live in 82 or Beast from the Hammersmith, or I don't know, one of those records, Live in 82, when Dickinson first came in, and they all Maiden it up, you know, and they make it longer and they make it a little bit different and more in the style of Maiden that they were doing at that time. But the original studio track of Sanctuary is fucking genius, and it is definitely the most punk rock Maiden song that they've ever done. Following Sanctuary is Charlotte the Harlot, and this is the only song written by Dave Murray. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of a dumb song. I don't mind it, and again, I like every song on the record, including Charlotte the Harlot, but it's not really like signature of anything. Even though the character Charlotte appears on other records later on, I still think this song is just kind of silly and whatever. And if they were gonna pluck a song from the album to not include, and they, you know, in the UK it was Sanctuary, I would rather had Sanctuary Beyond and Charlotte the Harlot got pulled off, and maybe that was like a later B-side or something like that, because it's just not a song that really is very strong at all. And of course, the record closes with the band's signature tune, Iron Maiden. Amazing riff. They played at every show. It's another fast kind of punky song. It's the one where whatever city you're in, I'm in Omaha, so you get Bruce Dickinson doing the "Scream for Me, Omaha," you know, and then, you know, Iron Maiden is about to start. That's when they're going to do the song. It's usually an encore or at the very end of the set. It is the classic. The band will not play a show without it. It just stands to reason. You know, it's the song called Iron Maiden. It has every element of their sound later on in it, but it also is very much of this particular album and why it's so good. Those are my basic thoughts on the record, why I love this record so much. And like I said, I do like subsequent Maiden records, you know, a lot more than I did back in the original 80s. But if I'm just being totally candid, and if I feel like listening to something that's going to pump me up, something sort of metal-y, you know, I'm going to be thrown on this first Iron Maiden, because that's the album that just does it for me every time. I mean, it gets my energy up, it gets the blood flowing or whatever, and then all of a sudden I'm like ready to go do something, you know, because it is relentless, except for a couple of times where they slow down, but it's mostly just like relentless, you know what I'm saying? I mean, in conclusion, I would just say that this is an album that stands alone in the Maiden catalog. Killers, which came out afterwards, has almost the same lineup. I mean, they got a new lead guitar player, but it's the other Paul Di'Anno record, in my opinion, is not nearly as good. The material's not as strong. This was honed material over many, many years. You'd see, it's why every song was perfect. It's because they'd been doing it for a very long time. Now when you get to the next record or the next record beyond that, there'd be a little bit of duds every now and again, because they're starting over. They're starting over with brand new batches of songs, and they didn't hone them in the clubs for 5 years. So that's where it stands right there. So, all right, hope you dug my thoughts. You go ahead, feel free, tell me where I'm wrong in the comments or whatever, or tell me that I'm actually the kind of Maiden fan that you've been looking to listen to or watch or whatever for a long time. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.